My name is Councillor George Dunstall, and I'll be chairing this meeting of the Pensions Committee and Board. Please can I ask the committee members and the officers to introduce themselves, starting going around to my left.
Cody Sprock, Principal Committee Coordinator.
Fiona Alderman, Director of Legal and Governance.
Councillor John Bevan, Northumberland Park.
Mark White, Councillor for Tottenham Central.
Anna Lawton for Hermitage and Gardens.
We are from KPMG, auditors Kunal here.
Mohammed from KPMG.
I'm Katie from KPMG.
I'm Andreas Andre from Pensions Team.
Daniel Lynch, Haringey, Senior Accountant.
Craig Patterson, Employer Representative.
Randy Plowright, Haringey Unison.
Eamon Kenny, Co-optee.
John Rose, Independent Advisor.
Rebecca Moore, Pensions Manager.
Jamie Abbott, Head of Pensions.
Great, thank you very much. And could I just ask everybody to switch off their mobile phones or switch them to silent to avoid any distractions? Only those members of the public who have registered to speak are permitted to do so. And welcome to our speakers, and I will indicate when it's your turn to speak. So we'll move on to item 1, which is filming at meetings. This meeting is being live streamed via the council's website and will also be recorded and available to view by members of the press and public. Everyone present is allowed to film as long as it does not disrupt the meeting. So thank you for that. Moving to item 2 is apologies for absence, lateness or substitutions. I've had apologies for absence from Councillor Inkerham, Councillor Da Costa and Keith Brown. And Steve Turner from Mercers. No other apologies, thank you. Moving to item 3, items of urgent business. Got no items of urgent business. Moving to item 4 is declarations of interest, conflicts of interest. Are there any declarations? No, there are none. Thank you. Please let us know if you do become aware of any during the meeting. Item 5, breaches of the law is not an item on this meeting, but it will be in future meetings, I'm told. So the new item 5, which is in your pack as item 5 or item 6? In your pack as item 6, is deputations, petitions and questions. And there are no deputations, petitions or questions. Moving to item 7 is record of training undertaken since last meeting. Is there any further training anyone wants to update on? Councillor Bevan.
I've sent my last few months training to the committee coordinator.
Fantastic, thank you. Sorry.
I've completed modules 1 through to 8 of the LGPS online HIMES training.
Have you got that, Cody? Fantastic. Anything else? Nothing at this time. Item 8 is minutes of the previous meeting which have been circulated to members. Does anyone have any comments regarding the accuracy of the minutes? Councillor Bevan.
Well, it's not accurate, it's just a question. It talks about officers would investigate how a committee member could become a member of LAP on page 5. I just wondered if officers have managed to check out how that works.
Not just yet, it's ongoing. So once we have a response, we'll share that with the PCB.
Okay, great. So can we agree the minutes of the 20th of March meeting? Agreed. Fantastic. I just want to add in here, I've got a piece of any other business to add to this evening's meeting, which is just with regard a letter I'm going to be producing and sending through to the London Civ with regard responsible investment, our work on responsible investment and our aspirations for how London Civ, as we move towards mandated pooling, will be how we hope London Civ will be able to investigate and explore opportunities for investment products that are free from public harm broadly. And I'll be writing that on behalf of the PCB. So that's that. Any questions on that at all? Great. Right. Rattling through, but we do have a busy agenda. So moving to item 9, which is the pension administration update, which is pages 7 to 12. This report provides updates regarding the fund membership, online self-service portal, SLA statistics, pensions dashboard project, approval of new admission agreements, collection of employer and employee contributions, internal disputes resolutions, and I'll hand over to Rebecca Moore, pensions team leader, to introduce this item and invite questions after. So, Rebecca.
Thank you. So starting with the pension fund membership update, the evidence in table 1 just shows that the membership numbers remain steady, but there's no big changes to report. Moving on to the online member self-service portal update, there's been a slight increase in registrations, but again, pretty steady with no major changes. Hoping the increase will be higher in the next quarter due to recent comms, including the pension fund update, which had 200 plus members attend online, resulting in the team directed members to sign up to the portal. The update on the service level agreement statistics, the percentage in change isn't as positive as we had hoped, but it's still relatively steady. We're currently down a team leader role, which we're actively recruiting for, as well as having 2 new officers who required extensive training. We're hoping to see more positive changes once we have a full team. Moving on to the pensions dashboard project update. The implementation of the ISP commenced in June 2025, and it will last up to 12 weeks. The ISP console and file transfer facility has been set up on our pensions system test servers, and we are currently in the testing phase with officers working with the software provider to ensure the environment functions as expected and matching criteria is suitable ahead of going live, which is on track for October 2025. We have contacted our AVC providers to inform them that we plan on operating a single connection source approach and have outlined the format that we require the data in. Approval of new admission agreements. One of the new updates going forward, this was recommended in the governance review. An admission agreement is a way for external service providers to join the LGPS. This usually happens when a service provider takes over a service that was previously provided by the council or a school and is therefore required to offer the LGPS to existing employees. Table 5 shows the new admission agreements which have been or are in the process of being completed. The collection of employer and employee contributions update, which is also a new standing item going forward. Employer contributions are set every 3 years through actual valuation, and employees are set nationally by legislation. All participating employers are required to submit monthly contribution schedules and corresponding remittances for both employee and employer contributions within the specified timeframes outlined in the fund's administration strategy, and I can confirm that all expected payments and corresponding contribution schedules are accounted for as of the date of this publication, as of the publication date of this report. Finishing on internal disputes resolution procedures, which again will be a standing item going forward. The internal disputes resolution procedure provides scheme members with a formal mechanism to appeal decisions or actions taken in relation to their pension benefits. There are 2 stages of the IDRP process, which is outlined in 6.24 and 6.25, and I can confirm that there have been no IDRP cases as of the publication date of this report or any current ongoing IDRP cases. And that's all from me.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions or queries for Rebecca? Nope. So we'll move out to the recommendation set out at page 7. 3.1, to note this report provided regarding pension funds administration activities for the quarter ending 31st of March 2025. And 3.2, to note and approve the admission of the entities listed in section 6.16 of this report as new employers participating in the Haringey Local Government Pension Scheme. Moving to item 10 in your pack, which is item 9, is the Pension Fund External Audit Plan year to 31st of March 2025. This report presents the draft audit plan prepared by the Pension Fund's external auditors, KPMG, for the audit of the Pension Fund's annual accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2025 for the Pension Committee and Board's consideration. And I'll hand over to Jamie just to introduce, and then we'll invite questions after.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of our statutory duties, we're required to publish the Haringey Pension Fund's annual report by the 1st of December. The Council has already released their draft statement of accounts, which includes the fund's draft accounts and is available online. The draft annual report will come to the Committee and Board in September for approval, well ahead of the deadline. KPMG remains our appointed auditor for the second year and has shared their draft audit plan for 24-25, which can be found in Appendix 1 of the report pack. It outlined their approach, key risks and timelines with the goal of signing off the final audit by January 2026, in line with the Council's main accounts. The pensions team have been working closely with KPMG since March to ensure everything is in place for a smooth process. We have Katie, Mohammed and Kunal from KPMG audit team here to walk through the draft audit plan in more detail, and I'll pass now over to KPMG to report to present the audit plan.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Chair. I take our audit plan for the financial year 24-25 as read. We will not go through in detail for the entire plan, but we will be covering up the key highlights from within the plan so that it will help you in navigating the overall report. We'll be happy to take any questions if you have towards the end for the plan. On page 3 and 25 of the pack, we have covered the materiality. To respond to the aggregation risk from individually immaterial misstatements, we design our procedures to detect misstatements at a lower level of materiality driven by our learning from the previous years about the fund's financial statements and the processes. The materiality was based upon 24 numbers when we were performing the planning. We have reassessed the materiality numbers using the 25 numbers, and it is more or less in similar lines.
Sorry, could you just get a bit closer to the mic?
Sure.
All right.
Is it better now?
Maybe pick it up a bit. Yeah, that might be
Better.
better. Thank you.
Perfect. I can repeat that one if that's okay. Perfect. To respond to the aggregation risk from the individually immaterial misstatements, we design our procedures to detect misstatements at a lower level of materiality. This is driven by our learnings from the previous years of the fund's financial statements and the processes. The materiality was based upon the 2024 numbers, which is mentioned in our audit plan. We have reassessed the materiality numbers using FY25 numbers, and it is more or less in a similar lines as we have seen. It's slightly at higher balances. On page 25 of the report and 27 of the pack, there are significant risks in the other audit risks which are mentioned over there. Professional standards require us to communicate the fraud risk from management override of controls as significant, and this is covered on the following pages. To respond to this, we will assess accounting estimates for biases by evaluating whether judgments and decisions in making accounting estimates, even if individually reasonable, indicate a possible bias. Evaluate the selection and application of accounting policies in line with our methodology. We will evaluate and design and implementation of controls over journal entries and post-close journal entries. During previous year's audit, we noted a control deficiency for journals which can be posted in the system for less than 50K. Similar deficiency exists in the current year as well. I'll hand over to Mohammed, who will take you through the other audit risks.
Thanks, Kunal. Good evening, members. The next risks we have on investments that these are not complete, do not exist, or are not accurately recorded. We are of the view that there is no change in audit risk considered for testing completeness, accuracy, and existence of funds investments. This is because the process of recording and processing the transactions pertaining to investments remains consistent with prior year. In response to the risk, we will perform the following procedures. gain an understanding of the process over completeness, existence, and accuracy of level 1, level 2, and level 3 investments, obtain direct confirmations from custodians and fund managers, vouch purchases and sales to investment manager, recalculate change in market value. As of now, we are in the process of our testing. We have received the confirmations from fund managers and are in the process of vouching sales and purchases and recalculations. The next risk we have is of valuation of level 1, level 2, and level 3 investments. We have assessed this as a higher risk, which is consistent with prior year. This is because of the estimation uncertainty resulting from unobservable inputs to these investments, as well as the amount of balance in the financial statements. In response to the risk, we will be engaging our valuation specialist team for testing of level 1 and level 2 investments. And for level 3 investments, we will be obtaining unaudited NAV statements and comparing it with the audited financial statements. We have been able to test most of the level 1 and level 2 investments till date. However, we are in the process of testing our level 3 investments currently. The next risk we have is that of actuarial position is not appropriately presented in the financial statements. The value of actuarial liability is an estimate involving the selection of appropriate actuarial assumptions, most notably the discount rate applied to the pension fund's liability, inflation rates, and mortality. Therefore, there is a risk that these are not appropriately disclosed in the financial statements, as these are not recognized in the financial statements, rather disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. In response to the risk, we will continue to involve our actuarial specialist to review funds' actuarial position, key assumptions selected by the actuarial specialist, and special events that have occurred during the year, if any. Our actuaries have completed their testing, and the results are within our acceptable ranges. I will now pass on to Katie to present the remainder of the plan. Thanks.
Just switch your mic off. Thank you.
So on page 16 of the slide pack, you'll see the breakdown of fees. These fees have been set centrally by the PSAA, and you would have seen that the overall fees for this year have decreased from the previous year. These fees only relate to the audit of Haringey Pension Fund, and it's separate from the audit of Haringey Council. The fee for this year also includes the ISA 315 scale fee, which was charged last year on a separate line item. And the fees are based on the assumptions outlined within the slide pack. Then moving on to timelines, as Mohammed has mentioned, we are currently progressing with our fieldwork, and we expect to complete our fieldwork in July with findings to be presented to the Pensions Committee later this year. At this stage of the audit, there's nothing of significance to flag. Then finally moving on, so our dependence confirmation is on page 18, which discloses matters relating to independence and objectivity, and I can confirm that we are independent to perform the work. So I'll pause there for any questions.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or queries? Oh, would you switch your mic off, Katie? Anyone have any questions or queries for KPMG colleagues on the audit? Councillor Bevan.
Well, I know last year the audits all got caught up in this problem with the audit system and the auditors. Will that issue or that, what shall I say? Will that sort of reflect on this year's audit, and will it be mentioned as an issue? Is it basically all out of the way now?
Will still impact for this year because of where there's a comparative figures in the accounts. They can't be confident with the opening balances for that year. So I don't know if KPMG you want to give an update on that, but that will be in the opinion for this year's accounts as well. But next year that will drop off, because if that makes sense. But
yeah, so this year our opinion will include also an opinion. Our opinion always includes an opinion on the prior year numbers as well. That is why we had a qualified opinion in the prior year. So because we were not able to get reliance on the numbers as of 31st March 2023. Since the closing balances are linked to the opening balances, so the comparatives in the current year accounts start with the 31st March 2023 numbers, as a result of which we will not be able to give clean opinion and we'll give a qualified opinion this year. Going forward, since the comparative will not include the 31st March 2023 numbers, so there will be a clean opinion going forward.
Thank you very much. So could I, just for clarity then, so the status ultimately will be the same as it was last year, but next year, because you yourselves as KPMG have had 2 years where you've completed it, that's the point at which you say, okay, we are now confident. Yeah, with you. Any other questions or queries for colleagues from KPMG on the audit? Councillor White.
Thanks. So I'd just like to have a slightly better understanding of the risks that have been set out and whether there's these risks that you've listed are risks that are specific to this pension fund, or they're just risks that all pension funds have, and you need to set that out in this report. And also, are you just saying that there's a risk that these negative things might happen at some point? You're not actually finding things that are going wrong in our pension fund and setting that out here. You're just saying that there's a risk of things going wrong. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Yes, these are the standard risks which we usually have seen across the industry for the LGPS pension funds. And we're not necessarily saying that these are the issues in the pension fund. This is something from the audit perspective. We consider that, yes, they are the risk and there's a possibility of having an error in those particular areas, which we will be mitigating it by performing the audit procedures and looking at the supporting evidences and vouching them off. So yes, this is not something specific for Haringey and do not necessarily mean that there's an issue in the pension fund.
Any other further questions or queries for KPMG colleagues? Nope. Thank you very much for your time. We'll move to the recommendations as set out on page 13. 3.1, to note and provide any comments on the draft audit plan that has been prepared by KPMG, included as an appendix to the paper. So thank you very much. And we'll move to item 11 in your pack, which is Haringey Business Plan and Budget. This paper sets out the background to recommendation 7 of the 2024 governance review and suggested principles to be applied in its application. These are followed by a preliminary outline of the pension fund business plan, and I'll hand over to Jamie Abbott to introduce this item.
Thank you. So the Haringey Pension Fund operates independently from the council's other functions, which means it has its own governance and financial responsibilities. As part of that, the Pension Committee and Board are required to produce an annual business plan and budget. When developing the plan, we'll follow a clear set of principles drawn on legislation, LGPS regulation, guidance from the Scheme Advisory Board and the pension regulator, as well as our own risk register and audit findings. It will be a collaborative approach shaped through officer-led workshops and input from the Investment and Governance Working Group with active involvement with the committee and board. The plan will focus on three key areas: governance and actuarial, investment and administration, and communication. And the budget will reflect real service needs. So, for example, in a valuation year, you have actuarial costs going up. So rather than just relying on inflation-based uplifts. A draft template is included in Appendix 2, and we're inviting feedback today to help shape the full version, which we brought to the September meeting. I'll now pass over to John Raisin, the independent advisor, to discuss the implementation of business planning and budget paper.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I mean, I think as Jamie has highlighted, that the reason for this paper really is to emphasise the difference between pension fund budgeting and council budgeting. They're two very different things, and that's particularly why in the paper last year I pointed out all the differences between a pension fund and a council, and that's been sort of doubled down on, I think, in 2025, both by the Scheme Advisory Board, and I refer to that on page 48. at the bottom, and also particularly by the government itself in the Fit for the Future response, where they talked about, and I quote, the government's view is that the pension fund budget setting should be seen as separate from that of the administration authority as a whole and should not be subject to resource restrictions which may apply across other functions. The government intends to set this out in guidance. I think that's a pretty clear statement. It's actually a very helpful statement. I think it backs up what has come out in earlier years. So really what this paper is about, and this is why I sort of set these principles down, is to where we can actually develop this budget from. And as Jamie said, the budget will go up and down and much in a very different way than the council budget. For example, this year there'll be a lot higher actuarial fees than there will be next year and the year after. And in the year after that, there'll be much higher actuarial fees again because of the triennial valuation. Other issues may also vary. So that's why we want to get these principles set out here, which are on page 49. And then really the way we want to do this again is the officers sit down, apply the principles, look at, some of what has gone on in the past, but really looking about what we should be doing and providing, and then bringing it back to the PCB. And we want to do that in an investment and governance working group, so that you can have a proper input to that before it actually comes back here for approval. And I mean, this will be the first time we've ever had a proper pension fund budget. And I mean, it's not every fund that has one at the moment. We're not unusually not ever having had this formally. But I think we're ahead of it in suggesting we would do it. And now the government is going to, I think, effectively push it, and I think quite rightly. So that's what the paper's about. It's really about a framework for officers doing it, and the PCB having a proper input into this. And perhaps having more influence than really over council budgets, because you're not constrained in the same way, and the financial framework's different.
Does anybody have any questions or queries for John on this? Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, on page 49, it refers to the need to keep specialist staff and staffing issues, etc., etc. So I'm just wondering where we are with apprenticeships. Have we got any plans to take on another 1 or 2 apprenticeships? Because this is a really crucial issue everywhere in the local government pension scheme.
Thank you. Yeah, and a very good point. So our current apprentices are finishing their final parts of their course and will be qualified in September of this year. And we're looking to take new ones on in January. So once that happens, we'll feed that back to PCB once we have new apprentices in the team.
Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. So just for a bit of clarity as well about the pension fund being separate in accounting terms to the council. Is everything that we're talking about here in this budget funded by the fund itself rather than by the council's general fund? Is that correct? Or is there some overlap where the general fund is actually the accounting has to be on these principles, but some of the money is coming from the general fund for, let's say, for instance, the amount of time that Taryn has to spend on the pension fund from that portion of her work, just as an example.
Well, the regulations are absolutely clear. The 2016 management investment regulations, that the fund has to be completely ring fenced, and they're giving no subsidy from either side. And I think that's set out actually in the rules about bank accounts, which say that you have to set up a pension fund bank account and that the provider of that bank account has no right to offset other actions of the council. So it is completely ring fenced. So everything the fund expense has to be paid for. So for example, Taryn's time, we have to make a reasonable estimate of how much time Taryn spends on that, and that estimate and that part is paid for by this fund. The part she spends on general fund is on general fund. If you take, the use of the buildings, etc., then that has to be, fairly and properly recharged appropriately to the fund. And I see this process as making sure that that's done properly and fairly, because there cannot be any subsidy between either side, and it has to be done properly. So there is no subsidy from this pension fund to the general fund and the other way. It's not allowed. It can't happen, and officers have to make sure it doesn't happen.
So to be clear, even the council is charging the fund for the use of this building for this meeting, then even to that level.
Somewhere in the recharge system, I don't know the detail of Haringey because I'm not an employee of the fund, but somewhere in the apportionments of Haringey, there will be a recharge to the pensions committee for its use of Haringey facilities. There has to be. It cannot be free. Cody, for example, and Fiona, part of their work is on the pension fund. Therefore, somewhere in the Haringey system there will already be a recharge, and that will always have been the case.
Any other questions or queries for John on the budgeting? Can I ask a slightly facetious question along the same lines as Councillor White? Like, Jamie sits in council offices. When you put into a budget what the cost of the pension fund is, you're then committing that to paper, and to some of Matt's kind of points, you suddenly put yourself in a position where, I don't know whether Jamie's you create a situation where there is a pressure around that, the recharge stuff. Maybe Taryn spends more time on pensions this year than she did in a previous year. Do you see what I'm alluding to here? I think the principle sounds good, important. We need to do it, but it seems to present a bit of a risk as well. Maybe am I over concerned about that?
Yeah, just to add to that. So currently that process is already in place. So those recharges for staff time, up the double entry between the council and the pension fund. So at year end that already occurs. This would just be putting it to the committee, so that you can monitor it, see that we're on track, and see those variances throughout the.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Any other questions for John on
Just one.
and Randy?
So just for clarity, how are the funds apportioned? And in terms of cost transparency, is it published anywhere?
In terms of which cost?
For the staff members, where they apportion their time for Haringey work and work for the pension?
Yeah, so I mean the split, it's all, it's not only is it just apportioned, the split is calculated by the central finance team at the council. That is agreed with the pension fund. Senior management agree those splits, and then obviously the accounting's done, but then also a physical payment is made to reimburse the council for that officer time, and that is done at year end. So at the end of March each year, that's how it's split accordingly.
I just can't remember seeing those costs, you see. That's the reason for my question.
Well, I don't think it's actually been presented to you as such, and that's the point of starting to do this budget. You will see it under administration expenses within the final accounts. If you look at the draft paper, you'll see it within there. Is that okay?
Great, thank you. Anything else for John on this? No? Fantastic. In which case, we'll move to the recommendations as set out. On page 43, it says 3.1 to note and provide any comments on the suggested principles outlined in the report and template business plan and budget for 26, 27 and 28, 29. Thank you. Moving on to item 12 is the governance review implementation plan. So this paper has been prepared to update the progress of implementation of the fund's governance review recommendations following the review undertaken by the fund's independent advisor. Officers welcome comment from the Pensions Committee and Board on the actions achieved to date. And I'll hand back over to Jamie Albert, who will introduce this, and then we'll have some questions after.
Thank you. So from the governance review carried out, there were 26 recommendations and they were presented to the pension committee and board. These were grouped into 3 categories. Category 1 for fundamental and urgent, Category 2 for items that are easily implementable, and Category 3 for those planned for implementation from 25-26. Officers have reviewed all the recommendations and drafted the implementation plan, which you'll find in Appendix 3. Table 1 of the report showed the progress made to date on these recommendations since the last meeting. So number 1, which was the approval of the emissions, we're going to change that so they no longer come to PCB as an action to approve, but we'll still present them as an item, just to update. That's been moved to the September meeting because, as you're aware, this is quite a busy meeting as it is. Item 4, the going forward, the regular pensions update report will include the collection of employer and employee contributions that had now been implemented from Rebecca's report from July onwards and will be a standing item. Item number 5, the preparation of the annual governance review to be included in the role of the independent advisor. This is now an expected role of the advisor to the fund. Item 6, to confirm to PCB the ability to comply with the 24-25 annual report requirements. This will be brought to the PCB in September when we present the draft annual report. Number 7, which was the comprehensive medium-term business plan incorporating an annual budget, I touched upon in the previous paper. We've started to work on that. We've got the preliminary framework, which has now been agreed. Now we're working toward getting the transactional data from the finance system to help build the budget and present that to the PCB in September. So that's showing 25%. The item 17, a standing item, breach of the law, which has been added from this PCB and will be a standing item going forward, 100% for that. Number 23, the Haringey Fund, as appropriate, actively engaged with London Civ. That's at 50% at the moment because officers have been in discussion for LCIV, and we are trying to kind of align our RI policy once it's drafted with the responsible investment matrix they are building to. So that's ongoing. So we put that at 50% for now. 24, so quite a few here, where circumstances warrant the Haringey Fund to consider possible utilisation of new services. So that's at 50% at the moment as well, because again, we've been discussing with LCIB the other option they can give us in terms of auxiliary support. And again, once those discussions formalise a bit more, we'll bring that to the PCB for review. And lastly, 25, annually, the London Civ will be requested to present to the PCB. That's at 100% because the LCIV are going to be invited to the September meeting to present to PCB. And I'll take questions.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit more detail on number 23 and progress. What kind of progress there's been about the responsible investment stuff with the Civ. I mean, I think that's pretty pertinent also, you know, given that we need to show some progress on this, something tangible, because we're going to carry on getting people standing outside shouting at us to do the things they want us to do. So I think we need to show that we're doing something tangible.
Yes, at the moment, the LCIV haven't formalised the RI matrix which they're building. So as I understand, there's kind of 3 buckets they're working on. So you have the hard line where there's kind of exclusions, midline where there's going to be engagement, and the lesser line on the far left where they're not going to be doing too much in terms of the RI stuff. So once we've completed our draft RI policy, with that document, we can then align it with the RI matrix which LCIV are working on. So it's kind of chicken and egg at the moment. Once we've got our policy in place, then we can engage a bit more with LCIV going forward from September.
I guess I would just add to that. I've sat in similar meetings to Jamie discussing these buckets, for want of a better term, of investment options, and made our feelings sort of think that my feeling, having sat in them at the moment, was that they are still in quite early stages of this stuff. It's really positive that they've sought to engage with board members. My personal feeling, having sat in those meetings, was that actually there was quite a big gap between bucket 2, kind of an engagement-based approach, and bucket 3, a kind of wholesale exclusion approach, and that I felt that there needed to be some work done around addressing that gap. And I guess we continue with that. We continue with that engagement as well. There was a sort of 4th sub bucket, wasn't there, which is an impact bucket, which is a lot of that stuff that we've talked at length around about kind of investment for public good, affordable housing, infrastructure, that sort of stuff. So yeah, those conversations have kicked off and are ongoing, I guess. Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, recommendation 6 refers to the new annual report requirements. If someone can clarify what that means. And on that issue, I remember asking, the finance officer isn't here, I remember asking that in the annual report, the cost of the fund is being shown in 2 places. The council cost is in one part of the annual report. The investment manager's fees is in another part of the annual report, which means anyone reading it would not instantly get an overall impression of the total cost of managing the fund. Now, the finance officer said that would be dealt with and she would get those 2 figures in one place. So if that can be clarified. So that's item 6. And then 24, it talks about new services except for strategic investment advice. Does that mean we will not be able to employ Mercers? Does paragraph 26 mean Mercers will go and the Civ will take over, or have I got that wrong?
Paragraph 26, as it was written, meant that Mercers would not go. Paragraph 26 was written before the present consultation of November 24 was issued. So I wrote my governance review before the government made their present announcements. So when I wrote the governance review, there was no proposal to remove the authority of funds to appoint their own investment consultant. So the way I wrote the recommendation, which was accepted by the officers and the PCB, was that the committee and board would look at all the services offered by the Civ and see whether or not they wanted to use them, except if the Civ offered investment advice, which this fund would not take. And that was the principle this fund agreed to at that time. However, the government has now, intends to, because it hasn't as at this point, because they've got to pass an Act of Parliament, which they haven't done yet, and they've got to amend the regulations, which they haven't done, but they will do, I'm almost certain of. We think that will happen. When they do that, and we'll come to that in the next report, then you will be required to take your principal investment advice from your pool rather than your appointed investment consultant. So the short answer is the role that Mercer have at the moment, they will not have going forward if the government pass that Act of Parliament and change the regs. Sorry, it's so long, but that's the answer.
And sort of following on from that, can I just ask on the last recommendation 25, annually London Civ to be requested to present to PCB, I'm wondering if that is not frequent enough, whether there's a case to say we want to see them every 6 months.
Good point. And further to John's point about if the bill passes and we do have to take the principal advice from LCIV, we would expect them to be at every PCB meeting as the financial advisor to the fund from April onwards. So it would be more regular.
So, the consultation of November 24 and the government's response has slightly overawed a couple of my recommendations. So Jamie's right and the chair's right. Instead of coming annually, we'd expect them, once the new arrangements are in place, for them to come quarterly, because they'll have a bigger role than they had at the time I wrote the review.
And just as a sort of logistical point, given we've had discussions about their capacity, are they aware of those expectations across 32 boroughs?
They are. So other funds have made a similar point and they've said that they're happy to attend from April onwards. Whether they need to get more internal resource to meet that requirement, I'm not sure, but hopefully they will stick to that.
Let's just say one thing, actually, you raised an issue there, and it comes back to the whole issue of pension fund budgeting. This is perhaps another reason why pension fund budgeting is a bit more important going forward and backwards, because you're going to have to delegate most of your investment responsibilities to the pool, and they're going to have to be paid for. We're not going to do it for free, and obviously, you know, they're going to be charging buzz, and that's one of the reasons. Personally, I think that pension fund budgeting needs to be much more in the open and transparent than it was in the past. It didn't need to be done in quite the same way because you controlled absolutely the spending on Mercer. Because, you know, effectively Jamie controlled that budget and could, you know, apart from the fee they get, he can stop it or give out other work, you know, etc. It will be different in the future because the pool will have, you know, different responsibilities and have to be a different dynamic. It won't be so easy to potentially control that on a day-to-day basis as Jamie can now. So I think that's another factor why pension fund budgeting is going to become a bigger issue.
And the annual report changes and the promise from the finance officer that all the costs would be in one place.
So the key changes are more around the kind of KPIs that we have to report on. So they're more extensive. So at the moment, we report on kind of admin work completed in timeframes, stuff like that. My understanding is the requirement is to extend that to more KPIs. I think about emails received, calls received, to just a bit more granular detail about the admin functions. And for the annual report, I believe, Daniel, do you want to talk to that about where the figures lie in the report?
Yeah, so to your first point, there's a couple of changes. Some of them was already implemented last year. So in for example, discussing about pooling, that side of it, there's also the additional disclosures around stripping out private equity investments and showing the split between UK and overseas within the annual report. And your second point around fees, I must admit I wasn't aware of that, but I'll take that on board and we'll put that into this year's version. It's the same with the accounts. You basically have the admin fees and then the investment fees are separate, just to clearly distinguish effectively the in-house costs as opposed to external third-party services. But we'll put that into a table so it's transparent so you can see the net impact across both.
Okay. Did you have no? Okay. Any further questions on this item? Great. Okay. In which case we will move to the recommendations as set out at page 53. 3.1. This is to note and provide any comments regarding the implementation of the fund governance review recommendations. And moving to item 13, which is the LGPS consultation fit for the future outcome. This paper sets out the background to the fit for the future consultation response and highlights the key areas that the Pensions Committee and Board will need to be aware of and consider the implications to the pension fund. I will hand back over to Jamie Abbott to introduce this item.
Thank you. I'll give a bit of background. So in May 2025, the government confirmed that most of the proposals from the LGPS consultation will go ahead with minimal changes, including the introduction of a new pooling model, despite mixed feedback, especially around pooling. As part of this, the number of LGPS investment pools will be reduced from 8 to 6, meaning that Access and Brunel will be dissolved. Their 21 member funds must decide on a new pool to join by the 30th of September 2025. The new pension scheme bill, published in June, gives the Secretary of State broad power to direct both pools and individual funds, including on investment decisions and even potential mergers. While no legal changes have taken place yet, the government aims to implement the new regime by March 2026. Success will depend heavily on strong collaborative governance between pools and funds, and London Fund in particular are being encouraged to strengthen the oversight of the London SIV and general governance structures. I'll now pass over to John Reason to discuss further detail on the consultation response, Fit for the Future outcome related matters paper in Appendix 4.
Thanks, Jamie. I mean, I think Jamie has summarised actually that very, very well. But essentially, it covers 3 issues: pooling, which is the one I think's hit the headlines, but there's 2 other important areas. That's local investment and governance of funds and pools. And I'll come to that a little bit in a second. But essentially, as Jamie said, they have implemented Fit for the Future as they proposed to. But there is a huge move in investment responsibility from funds to pools, but this should not be seen as a handover of power from yourselves to the pools, because as Jamie has said, and I talk about this in depth on page 66, the last paragraph, the Pension Schemes Bill gives the Secretary of State absolutely enormous powers to direct both pools and funds going forward. And I've just quoted a couple of the sections in the bill that the government is proposing, and I'll just read you one. For example, section 12C provides for, quote, imposing requirements or prohibitions on asset pool companies. Fair enough. Well, what about 12E3? To give a direction to a pool requiring it to take or not to take a specified decision in carrying out any specified investment management actions. So these are the reserved powers that the government's talking about. So we shouldn't see this as a transfer from funds to pools. This is ultimately a situation where the government is taking huge reserve powers, and that is why close positive relationships between funds and pools going forward is going to be absolutely crucial. This isn't about handing over, as I said, power to funds, from funds to pools. This is about working collaboratively between the 2 sides, because of course everything the pool does is on behalf of the funds and has to take account ultimately of the liabilities that the actuaries identify. So I think is where we really need to be focusing. And the chair's already mentioned about the RI policy. That's an early example of where there's got to be a really positive relationship between the 2 sides to get something which the funds want and can be satisfied with, but equally the pool can implement. Now, the government has said, I say it in here, they don't expect a bespoke RI policy for every fund. There can't be 32 in London. It wouldn't be reasonable to ask the pool to do that, but equally the pool has to take account of the different approaches between this fund and some certain other funds. So I think that's the big message in all of this with regard to pooling. Yes, most of your powers are going to go over to the pool. I personally think, and I think lots of people do, investment advice, you should have the choice of securing your own investment advisor, as you have done for many years, and take their advice and then it be implemented by the pool. The government said, no, we don't want that. We're going to introduce a fiduciary model. And that's why it's going to be very important actually to have proper governance around the pool. How that's going to be done and improved is unclear at this point, but I do think that London boroughs need to make sure that the oversight of what is effectively a fiduciary that you can't remove, which you could in a private sector, remember, is good. To move on to the other 2 areas, which have been sort of overlooked, unfortunately, I think in a lot of sort of public commentary, local investment. I think there's some positives here, actually, because what is to be required is that individual funds, together with the pool and with the strategic authority, which in your case is the GLA, will look to promote local investment. Now, the ultimate responsibility for determining where LGPS money is actually invested will belong with the pool. But boroughs and the GLA can put forward proposals. I think this is positive in that certain local investments, and the definition of local investment is something which is GLA wide in the case of London, but it could be something which is local to a particular area. That I think more local investments will occur than would have occurred in the past using LGPS money. However, nobody should fear that it will be a free for all and that things will be invested in which are not sound, because of course the pool has, well, its own reputation to look after, so it won't, I don't think, approve anything which isn't sound. And secondly, ultimately, if the pool doesn't make the returns, it comes back to the employers, and the employer contribution rates ultimately in the long term would go up. So I think overall the local investment proposal should be looked at positively, because I think that good local investment, however you define that, schemes across London or across, the different parts of England and Wales will have more chance of being funded via LGPS money as a result of this reform. But I think it'll only be proper, things. It won't be pie in the sky schemes in inverted commas. So I think that's very positive. That's my outlook on it. Others may have another light, but I think it's a positive because I think the safeguards are there, that the pool will do the due diligence, the pool will be responsible for managing the investment, monitoring it, etc. So the burden's back on them actually. And if anything goes wrong, it will be back on them. And then finally, fund governance. We go back to the Scheme Advisory Board governance review. You'll remember that. This consultation, very importantly, finally proposed to bring most of that in 3 years after it was proposed. They've come back and said they're going to do most of the things, so there will be an LGPS senior officer. And I think that again will demonstrate the separateness of the fund from the rest of the council. There will be responsibilities about, or more further requirements on training, and I think we're talking about that in the training plan, and we're a bit ahead on that. There will be an independent governance review, i.e. will be done of every fund every 3 years rather than 2. And I think that's another reason why all the governance reforms we're putting in place are positive. So that's really what I want to say. I think there's a lot of positives in Fit for the Future, particularly on local investment and fund governance. And with regard to pooling, well, so long as pools and funds work together, I think the new world can work. And I trust it will work. And that's all I can say.
Thank you very much, John. Does anybody have any questions or points of clarification or thoughts for John?
I'll just echo what John was saying around oversight, really, in terms of the pool. I guess in summary, you just don't want to be in a situation where they're kind of marking their own homework. So I think it's very important, the whole oversight and scrutiny. That goes back to the budget point, but also wider oversight.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple of questions, I suppose. I think the local investment stuff, and I might be missing something here, but still strikes me as incredibly vague. Like, sounds fantastic, and in a London context, especially, think of the housing crisis and all of this. However, we've also had conversations about the fact that, that kind of investment is relatively low return over a very long time. It's solid return because it's bricks and mortar, but it's a relatively low return over a long time. So you wouldn't want local investment in that sort of thing to be a huge part of your portfolio. I mean, at the moment, it's not anything, is it? So, something is better than nothing. But I guess I'm just still really struggling to imagine what local investment in the future looks like from the pool. I don't know whether anybody has any thoughts on.
I think you're right from a factual point of view. I mean, I was talking there at a theoretical principle basis, and I think the principles are good. You're right about the practicality of it, but again, in the strategic asset allocation, which, the pool will provide advice on, but ultimately, you set your high level thing, and there will be a range for you to put in for local investment. And local investment is never, as you say, going to become, a huge element of LGPS. But the fact is that across England and Wales, a 1% move from, say, if we move 1% from listed equity to say, at the present time to local investment, that would probably be somewhere about £3.5 billion across the country. Now, I don't know what the percentage will be, but I think it will have an impact locally, but it will be in accordance, as you've sort of hinted, Chair, in terms of the fund's needs. So it will still be based on, ultimately the actuarial assumptions. So this isn't a panacea, and that's why, I say that, if there is anybody in, any authority, and it won't be, I'm not talking to members of Haringey Council, but if there's anyone in any authorities anywhere, wherever that might be, who think suddenly there's going to be loads of money for their local schemes, whether that's a local scheme in a borough or across a strategic authority, it's not going to happen, as you say. But I think it will help free up money for, or to enable local investments. That's all I'm saying. It's positive, but you're right to be cautious.
Well, sorry, sort of musing, I suppose. Here. I don't want to be sort of constantly negative about stuff because it does sound fantastic. However, it does also raise some challenging questions. You know, if we were saying, we had a conversation a few PCBs ago about, investment in property that might look like care homes, for instance. Now, a lot of care homes are managed by private equity firms. Do we want to be investing in private equity firms building care homes that then charge us an absolute fortune to place elderly residents in? So that it's not without its limitations and challenges, I suppose.
And I think that actually is where the involvement of members, particularly from boroughs, is important, because it's not just about pushing ideas forward, it's also about possibly, and that's a very good example, raising the issues, because ultimately, if these were put forward, if anybody put an idea like that forward, Paul would have to look at it and evaluate it. But equally, the inputs of the individual funds are important here, because you're right, there is a danger theoretically that things like that, which do look attractive from a numbers point of view, but from a reputational point of view, and that there is some real challenges here as well. So you're right, there's lots of challenges, but I think the principle is good. It's the detail which is going to be difficult.
Great, thank you. Any other, Councillor White?
Thanks, Chair. Just John, going back to the point you made earlier about the need for a really good relationship between the funds and the pools, and I'm just wondering whether in London we face a bit of a specific problem there, because even after the reduction in the number of pools, we're still going to be in a situation where in London we've got a lot more funds as a members of that pool than anywhere else. I think still it's going to be more than twice as many as any other pool, probably. Is that right? So it's how, I'm just wondering how we're going to sort out the governance in a way that makes that possible. With 30 odd voices, it's going to be hard to come to a consensus.
I'm not going to put the answer because I haven't got it, but you're right. It is a lot more challenging where you have a pool, of possibly a dozen members. It'll be, a lot easier than 32. You're right. It's very difficult, extremely difficult. I think the one thing about London boroughs is, although they're all different, at least they're of a similar size, and there's probably some similarities. For example, you're within the same geographical region, which is better, I think, than perhaps with some of the pools, which are going to be very spread out. I mean, we hear today that Wiltshire is joining LGPS Central. Well, that's very interesting. Wiltshire is a little bit south of, I think, Worcestershire is as far south as it goes at the moment, so we don't have that problem. So it is going to be difficult, you're right, but I think perhaps other pools have got their difficulties as well. I haven't got the answer, but it does need to be held to account properly, because the danger is if there is weak governance of the pool, it could go off and be doing things which ultimately the member funds don't like. But how you do it is difficult. Perhaps we could talk about that another time.
Please do.
Just quickly. So are we expecting a kind of governance review for the CIV on how that works? And if so, is there any kind of like timetable set out for that, or are we just in the dark about that completely at the moment?
Well, the consultation certainly talks about new governance models, and that's towards the end of that paper that I produced. They say they're going to set out some sort of framework, but that'll take months. I think it's really up to the boroughs to push this on the CIV, because it is you who will push the governance, because ultimately you own. So it really has to be a decision really by the boroughs as to how they want to improve the oversight of that particular pool. And there's a number of models they could use with that. But I think you're right, it is urgently needed, and that is something that the boroughs need to consider, I think, as a matter of urgency, how they're going to hold a pool better to account, because so far pooling essentially has been voluntary. I mean, the present regime really has been voluntary, and that's why some London, 1 or 2 London boroughs haven't put their money in at all because it was voluntary. It's now going to be compulsory, and they'll have to put all their money in. And if you have to put all your money in and it's compulsory, you need a real proper governance structure, one that meets your requirements ultimately.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments on this for John? No? Great. So we'll move on to the recommendations as set out on page 61. 3.1, to note the contents of the report, members are invited to consider the information presented and raise any questions or comments. This report is intended to inform future discussions and ensure we remain fully engaged in the development of pooling. Item 14 is the LGPS McLeod determination. This report provides background to the McLeod case, the implementation timings and the determination decision that authorities can take. Also contains a draft determination to extend the McLeod implementation for certain qualifying members and sets out steps that will be taken following a determination. I'll hand over to Jamie Abbott to introduce it.
Thank you. So I'll start with a bit of background. So back in 2014 and 2015, the government introduced reforms to the public sector, public service pension schemes like the LGPS to improve long-term sustainability. So these included moving from a final salary to a career average structure and changing the normal pension age. So protections were put in place for older members, but following legal challenges, the Court of Appeal ruled in 2018 through the McLeod case that these protections unfairly discriminated against younger members. The government committed to addressing this and extended the underpin protection to eligible members of all ages. The pension fund commissioned an independent report to assess the progress and challenges faced on the McLeod project. This includes a detailed analysis of the implications of making a determination, and the full report is available in Appendix 6. Because of the complexity involved in implementing the McLeod remedy, the government introduced a McLeod implementation phase that runs until the 31st of August 2025, with the option to extend to 2026 through a local determination. While extensions are allowed, the government expects most of the work to be completed by the original deadline. However, Haringey Pension Fund won't be able to meet the 2025 deadline and is now working towards August 2026. This is considered a breach and will be reported to the pension regulator in line with their June 2025 statement. There are a number of reasons for the determination and extension to the project deadline, and these are listed in Table 1 of this report. To date, the Haringey Pension team have collected membership data that will assist in the McLeod calculations. The next step for further data gathering to assist with the project and identifying eligible members will be obtaining information on previous non-LGPS public service, so police, fire, teachers, NHS, as members who are not currently eligible could be if they have previous service with these funds. The letters to members requesting this information will be sent out by the 31st of July 2025. The fund has been following the MHCLG guidance on case prioritisation and are working firstly on Group 1 members, which are new final underpin dates and deaths, ensuring that business as usual work meets the McLeod remedy guidance. Work will commence on Group 2 members, which are retrospective cases, once we receive the responses from members in regard to the previous service data gathering exercise. Members affected by the McLeod remedy will be informed in their 2024-25 annual benefit statements, which will be scheduled to be sent by the 31st of August 2025. That a determination has been made, which means their statements won't yet reflect the McLeod adjustments. However, their 25-26 statements will include any applicable increases. We'll also update the fund's website to reflect this and continue progressing the remedy work, aimed to complete it by the 31st of August 2026. And then from the 1st of September 2026, McLeod will become part of business as usual. A detailed project timeline and plan will be presented to the September PCB meeting and will be a standing item going forward to ensure the project remains on track and all progress is reported. And I'll take any questions on that.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Does anybody have any questions or queries for Jamie on this item? No? In which case, we'll move to the recommendations as set out at page 73. There are 3 recommendations. So 3.1, do we agree that the McLeod remedy should not be reflected in the qualifying members' annual benefit statements for 24-25 where applicable, and the McLeod implementation phase to be extended to the 31st of August 2026 for all qualifying members? Agreed? Yeah. Recommendation 2, 3.2, agree that where a determination is made for a member and they receive an annual benefit statement for 24-25, they be informed of the determinations and the reasons for it in the ABS. Agreed. And 3.3, agree that where a determination is made for a member and they do not receive an ABS for 24-25, the website be updated so that members in this category are informed of the determination. Great. Moving to item 15, which is the Haringey Pension Fund Risk Register. Paper has been prepared to update the Pensions Committee and Board on the Pension Fund's Risk Register and provide an opportunity for the Pensions Committee and Board to further review the risk score allocation. And I'm going to hand back over to Jamie, who will introduce this for us.
Thank you. So the risk register follows the RAG scoring, red, amber, green, and I'll focus on the key identified risks in section 6.6, table 1. So first, the first risk, IV9, around proposed changes to LGPS pooling, which we touched upon previously, has now been rated a red following the outcome of the Fit for the Future consultation. We've also added a new risk, INV5, which relates to the concerns around the adequacy of London SID internal resources. With the March 2026 deadline for asset pooling and pools becoming the primary source of investment advice, there's a real risk around meeting that deadline and whether LSIV has the capacity to support it. We'll be working closely to ensure collaboration with LSIV to monitor the situation, and will keep the board updated on any material developments. Another new addition is AD7, which reflects the increase in volume of legislative and regulatory changes affecting the LGPS. This is putting pressure on team resources, as we've seen with the need to extend the McLeod project deadline. There also is an ongoing consultation with Access and Fairness, and that is covering, one second, kind of 4 key areas. So you have survivor benefits, which are around pension entitlement equalisation, extending the death grant on age 75 cap, gender pensions gap, the opt-outs, so that now need to be included in the annual report, and forfeiture, so removing the requirement for the member to have left employment. So this consultation, if it does come in, will again add added resource requirement with the team. So implementing 7 changes at once on top of major projects like McLeod and pension dashboards could put pressure. And then some changes like the proposed backdating of the survivor pensions or cohabiting pension from that consultation may require manual case-by-case reviews. So that again will kind of put more pressure on the admin team. So that's the key risk we identified. So we managed this would ensure that each work stream has a robust project plan and will report any additional resource needs back to PCB. INV1 remains a key risk, and we continue to monitor it closely, consulting with our investment advisors and bringing a recommendation to the board as needed. On ESG risk INV3, we're currently drafting our first responsible investment policy based on the beliefs work we've done already, and we aim to bring that to the September PCB meeting. I'll take any questions on the key identified risks.
Does anybody have any questions in regard to the risk register for Jamie? No, I've just got one in regard to, I've lost it. The SIV and SIV resourcing. My papers are not in colour, but I'm taking from this that it's green or amber. Amber. Okay, we've had lots of discussions about their resourcing. We've also had conversations with the SIV, and they've told us that they are, resourcing up. Do we have any evidence that that's the case, and are we confident in their resourcing? I mean, it's the big. it's a big risk that we don't have any control over ultimately, isn't it? So yeah.
So I can speak to their investment resourcing. I know they've taken on, I think it was 8 new staff in that area. In terms of the wider staffing, I haven't heard anything from them, but this is why it's key to kind of keep engaged with them, keep asking the questions, see what they're bringing internally and what they can and can't do, and their expected timeline for that. And that's why, like I said, we'll keep talking to them and feed that back to the PCB. But you're right, we need to make sure that they are bringing people in if they need to do so.
Great, thank you.
I think Jamie's right to have resourced up, and I think it's also notable that in the last couple of years they've taken on some, including our former head of pensions, into their organisation. I think they've got more concept now than they had perhaps going back a while ago about the client. To be quite honest, I think they've got a lot more concept since they've taken on people like Tim and Anjan about the client. That in itself, of course, doesn't solve all the issues, but I think that's the important stage. And as Jamie said, they have taken on some more people on the investment side as well. And of course, they've got a new CIO recently. So yeah, hopefully they are. They've also put out a tender for, well, when I say investment consultancy, it's a bit more complicated than that, but investment support. And I think this is presupposing the change from local investment consultants being appointed by funds to them having that responsibility. Now, they have not got the capacity to provide investment consultant advice as, say, Mersab or Hymans do for many other funds. They are going to tender for some form of advisory organisation. So I suspect we will see. Now, probably one of the names we're familiar with within the LGPS, and obviously there are names beyond Hymans and Mercer's, 1 or 2 others as well, 3 or 4 others perhaps. So they are trying to do that as well. They are seeking to do that, to put something in place. So I think they are making efforts, but as Jamie said, it is huge. And again, I think that's why the interaction and a robust interaction, both at officer and at member level, and at chair level, is extremely important, because they are under a lot of pressure to do it. But it's in our interest they do it.
I hadn't really considered that naively, but that's a really interesting point that they are getting external input on their, we're getting advice, but from whoever they commission to deliver that.
Well, that's going to be one of the issues. You see, you could end up, with an investment consultancy firm appearing here, but they won't be an investment consultancy firm appointed by you and answerable to you and controlled in terms of their budget day to day by Jamie. They will be, an investment consultancy firm potentially appointed by someone else and ultimately reporting to them, not to you. So that's going to be the difference.
Okay, great. Any further questions on this item? Nope. In which case we'll move to the recommendations as set out on page 87 to note and provide any comments on the fund's risk register, area of focus for review of this meeting. Moving to item 6, which is the pension fund annual training plan. And again, I will hand over to Jamie to introduce this.
Thank you. So a bit of background. Back in April 2022, the board approved our training plan for committee and board members, as well as senior officers, and that policy still stands today. Although the pension regulated code of practice was updated in 2024, the knowledge and skills requirements remain largely the same. So the 2022 policy is still valid. For 2025-26, we've developed an annual training plan based on the 8 core technical areas from the CIPFA framework. Training will be delivered through a mix of online platforms like Hymans Robertson's Lola platform and the Pensions Regulators Toolkit, along with internal sessions led by officers and external experts. The plan also outlines how we monitor progress, report on compliance, and start preparing for the 26-27 training cycle. Table 1 outlines the proposed internal training plan for the 25-26 period, with the actuarial training already having taken place this evening prior to the meeting. I'll now pass over to John Raisin to present the Haringey training policy paper, which can be found under Appendix 9.
Thanks, Jamie. As Jamie said, 2022 was when we put in place the training policy. But if you recall, when I did the governance review in 2024, what I essentially said was that policy had only been partly implemented in reality. And we actually needed something firmer, which was a training plan, a specific detail, over a year as to what we're going to do this properly. And that becomes important now, particularly important because in Fit for the Future, in the fund governance parts, they are going to require higher standards of pension committee and board members and officers as well in terms of training. It's going to be reported on a named basis in the annual report going forward. That was part of the 2024 new annual report guidance that the government issued. So this plan tries to put that in place. And actually, I think it's fairly simple to do, because what I think we can do for this year, and I think we can pretty well satisfy for this year, is, as Jamie said, there are 8 core areas in the CIPFA framework. And if we look at LOLA, which is the Hyman Robertson Online Academy, and the Pensions Regulators Toolkit, which it is agreed in the policy that all members have to complete within 6 months. If you look at those cover actually between them in some way all the 8 areas in a very, very high level. So if everyone does that and confirms by the 23rd of January next year that they've done it. Now, I know some members have already done it in the past. If you've done it and can prove it, just prove it to Jamie in terms of the certificates. Although you can monitor LOLA online, can't you? Because, of course, Jamie knows who's done LOLA and who hasn't, because he has access to the Hyman Robertson database as well. So as you do it, he'll know. But if everyone can have done those 2 by 23rd of January next year, that will at least satisfy what I think is the basic requirement, that everyone has some basic knowledge of the 8. The pension regulator's kit is important because the pension regulator expects that for boards, and of course you're a committee and board, but that only covers, remember, essentially numbers 1, which is and 2, which is legislation and governance, and the pensions admin side. It doesn't cover anything else. What Jamie and I discussed was having something to cover the other areas in the 4 sessions at 6 o'clock. So the other 4, or the other areas, are all covered in a bit more detail at 6 o'clock. So we've done the actuary tonight, and Hyman's, I think, probably, sort of set the standard for doing that. We've had a pretty comprehensive coverage, certainly of one area of the actuarial. I mean, there's other areas, but that's the big one. So I think we can be satisfied that given it's an actuarial year, you've had that, basic training. The next time around, we'll look at investment, and that'll be done between officers and myself. So we'll look at 6, 7 and 8. And then in December, we'll look at accounting and auditing. That's really important from a governance point of view, because you have to look at the accounts and to the whole auditing issue. And, you heard from KPMG earlier, and it is important that you understand the background to that, I think, a little bit more than has been presented to you in the past. So that's what that session is going to be. And I think that has to be run annually because the reporting requirements do change. And then next year, Jamie's team are going to talk about the practicalities of pensions admin, because pensions admin is covered by LOLA and covered by the pensions regulator, of course, is, at a higher sort of broader level. Jamie and his team will talk about some of the practicalities that, or either Rebecca's team now, that Rebecca and her team face, and they'll do that in next year. And I think if we do those 4 sessions, plus you do LOLA and pension regulators talk, we should be in a fairly good place to produce evidence going forward, because we're going to have to produce it when we get the independent governance review, which will happen in the next 3 or 4 years. And what's at the back of my mind is that power that the Secretary of State is reserving to themselves under Section 5 of the Pension Schemes Bill to potentially amalgamate funds. And I think, that may happen sometime. And, who's going to get amalgamated? Those who probably don't perform well on independent governance reviews. I don't think Haringey will be in that position personally, because I think you're doing the sort of things and have agreed already to do the sort of things which will be required. So that's another reason for all of this. So hopefully that'll take us to another place with training.
Great. Any questions or queries on training? Councillor White.
Thanks. I think it's great that this is being formalised and set out what needs to be done. what's missing here is what happens when it doesn't get done. So I suppose maybe you don't want to set it out in writing, but there may be cases where people don't complete the training. Does that mean that they forfeit their place on the PCB, or can that not happen because it's a decision of full council? I don't know. I'm not quite sure of the technicalities there.
Well, you're right. I mean, you know, the places on the PCB, you know, are a decision of council, but the statutory guidance for 2024 requires that attendance and completion training is named in the annual report. So this policy says that, you know, at the end of the year, Jamie will report, you know, by name anyone who hasn't completed it. So yes, there will be a naming, not because anyone wants to be difficult, but because the statutory guidance says that it has to be named. And given the policy says that you have to do Lola and the pensions regulators toolkit within 6 months of joining, well, whether anyone's done it in 6 months or not, it's not particularly here and there at the moment. As long as you've done it by 23rd of Jan next year, that'll be fine, because it's going to have to be reported on publicly, because that's what the statutory guidance requires. So no one can be removed, but it'll probably be embarrassing. To be honest, Lola, it'll probably take anyone who hasn't done it 12 hours to do it. You did it recently, didn't you, Eamon? It's about 12 hours, wasn't it? So it's not difficult. Pensions regulators toolkit, not a lot of work either, although you can't bluff your way through it at all because the questions are quite difficult. And if you don't actually do it, I got someone to test it out once, and they didn't do it, and they tried to sort of work it out, and you can't work it out. So you've got to do it. But if you do it, it's not difficult. No.
Great. Thank you. Could I just ask a practical question? If members want logins for Lola and pensions regulator, how do they go about getting hold of those, Jamie?
So all members should have been sent a login for Lola already. But if any member doesn't have access or have forgotten their logins, just email me and I can get a new one set up for them.
Pensions regulator, you have to go onto their site and register. So Lola, Jamie knows who's done it and who hasn't. The only way you can prove pensions regulator is to produce your certificate with all the modules on it to Jamie. That's the only way he'll know. So the onus is on you to prove pensions regulator, whereas Jamie will know that you've done Lola.
A quick further point, and the actuaries can confirm, I'm sure on Lola there's an extra section we can upload other evidence from external sources. So if you do the TPR toolkit, we could then upload that to Lola to have all the training in one place.
Okay. Any further questions? Everybody happy? In which case we'll move to the recommendations as set out on page 101. 3.1 is to note the independent advisor's report appended as Appendix 1. 3.2, bear in mind what you're approving here, is the training plan and the commitment to undertake that training, if you haven't already undertaken that training, for 25-26 as set out in Appendix 1 of this report. Is that approved? Yep. Great. Thank you. Moving on to item 17, which is the forward plan. Paper has been prepared to identify and agree upon the key priorities for the Pensions Committee and Board over the upcoming months, as well as seek PCB's input into future agendas. And I will hand over to Jamie again, who will introduce and lead this item.
Thank you. I'll just skip straight to point 6.4, table 1, the key fund priorities. So we've now completed the setting of our responsible investment objectives, which lays the groundwork for the next step, which is drafting the responsible investment policy. That work is already underway, and we're aiming to bring the first draft to the September PCB meeting. The investment opportunity review has been slightly delayed to make room for training from our actuary today on the valuation and assumptions and the draft audit plan presentation, but it will align with the investment strategy work linked to the valuation and be pushed back to December. Officers will coordinate with our financial advisor to arrange relevant training for the board on the investments, and will feedback once this has been arranged. On the business plan, a draft template had been prepared as presented, And we're starting work on the automated transactional data from the system to streamline the budget setting process. And then in section 6.8, table 2, we've outlined upcoming training opportunities for the board, which includes a session on investment and accounting and audit. Yeah, take any questions.
Any questions on this, Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, on page 117, there's a table for the year. I think I've raised this issue before. The LAP conference is on the 3rd and 5th of December this year. I think in the September meeting column, on a permanent basis, there should be an instruction to draw that attention to pension committee members in case they want to go. I think I raised that before, actually. And then just as a question, can I ask the committee members, have you all got the last LAP quarterly 2 report that's just been emailed out? Because I've got it. I'm just concerned that other committee members are not getting it, because it refers to the LAP voting alerts, which we haven't actually had a report on any voting alerts and whether we've implemented them.
Apology, taking notes. Yeah, so any members who aren't getting the quarterly reports, let me know and I'll trace up LAP. And for the voting alerts, you are correct. That was a standing item in the last report, and I'm not sure why it's been missed this time round, but I'll make sure that from the September meeting, it's part of the report. So apologies.
Any other questions or queries on this item? No? In which case we'll move out to the recommendations as set out on page 113. 3.1 is to note and provide any comments on progress towards agreed key priorities, specifically regarding responsible investment development and implementation of fund governance review. And 3.2 is to identify additional matters and training requirements for inclusion within the PCB's forward plan. Item 18 is the pension fund quarterly update, and this is for Jamie again. So I will introduce, no, I won't introduce. Jamie will introduce this item for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't worry, we're all getting towards the end. So as at the 31st of March 25, the Haringey Pension Fund portfolio was 1.92 billion. This is a 0.5% decrease over the quarter, and this was down to poor equity performance. Chart 1 shows the fund assets over the last 5 years. So looking to section 6.3, the funded position update as at the 31st of March 2022, we're in a strong position with a funding level of, where are you? 113%, meaning our assets exceeded our liabilities at that point, based on a 4.3% discount rate. So Hyman Robertson, our actuary, continues to provide regular updates using current assumptions, and a detailed breakdown is included in confidential appendix 11. Since the last valuation, we've seen a modest increase in asset, but more notably, the value of our liabilities has gone down. This is largely thanks to a rise in real discount rates, which have improved the expected returns from our investment strategy, and in turn boosted our overall funding position. I now pass over to John Bevan to present the update on market commentary in Appendix 12.
Sorry, Mike.
We're talking quite a long time ago, January, March. That quarter essentially was one of decline because following the re-election of Mr. Trump in November, markets became very exuberant. But between January and March, they sort of became concerned about the potential effects of tariffs. And also there was questions about artificial intelligence, because there was a report that a Chinese company had developed a solution at a far sort of lower cost than the Americans had. And overall, because the American market is so dominant, that market was down about 4%. And so it pulled down the world market by 2%, even though most markets outside the US slightly gained. But of course, what's happened since, just to talk about more up to date, because this is January to March, there's been a complete bounce back. because of course Trump announced his Liberation Day, so-called, on the 2nd of April, and markets went further down because they were worried about tariffs. But of course, now markets, for whatever reason, because tariffs seem to have gone back, because he's pushed some back and some have been negotiated and mitigated. I think Japan's the latest example today. Markets have gone up again and have now reached new heights. It is a very strange world. That's all I can say. With markets at the moment, do valuations really reflect reality? Well, that's a very good question. I'll say no more. Happy to take questions.
Any questions or comments on for John? Comments on American politics? No. Okay, great. In which case, we'll move to the recommendations.
The update on the actual investment.
Oh, sorry, of course.
Yeah. So section 7.1 show the pension fund investment performance against the benchmarks. So as you can see, they seem to be underperforming, but for the Allianz Global Investors, BlackRock, CIP, and Pantheon, so there's a slight concern that the valuation process we're using might not be calculating returns for private market assets like infrastructure debt in the most accurate way. So what often happens with these types of investments is that when capital is returned or paid out, it can show up as a negative return, which doesn't reflect the true performance. So this kind of skews the results, especially when compared to a fixed benchmark like 5.5% target. Given that some of these are quite old investments now, it would be sensible to review our approach to ensure the reporting is giving us a fair and accurate picture. For example, BlackRock paid out a distribution during the quarter, which had massively decreased the investment value. That's why it shows a massive negative compared to the benchmark. So going forward from the September meeting, we may look to change that report, that graph, to make it a bit more accurate in terms of returns against the benchmark. The LSIV Absolute Return Fund. So this is the RUFA strategy, which has been discussed a few times at the PCB. RUFA had a disappointing 2023 and 24 with negative returns due to being overly defensive in a market environment where risk assets performed well. The benchmark for this strategy is pretty hard to outperform, currently given it's SONIA plus 4.5% and cash is 4.2%. So all in all, it's a 9.75% target. It's a defensive asset class, so still plays a key part in the portfolio though. The LSIV MAC fund, multi-asset credit. In general, many multi-asset credit funds have underperformed against SONIA plus returns targets over the last 3 years. Multi-asset credit funds were down 10-12% in 2022 due to market conditions, then recovered in the year 2023 and 24, but still find it hard to outperform benchmark returns that were positive rising in this period. And the LSIV London Fund is a relatively new fund and had not fully reached maturity, so show as underperforming against the benchmark, but as the investment matures, we would hope to see it more aligned with the benchmark. Then section 7.7 covers investments with the pool. So with the government's response to the Fit for the Future consultation, we now expect that all pension fund investments will need to be either pooled or recognised under pool management by the 31st of March 2026. Fund officers are currently working with LSIV to develop a transition plan for moving the remaining unpooled assets into the pool. This plan will take into account practical considerations like timing and transactional costs. And once the draft is ready, it will be brought to the Pension Committee and Board for review and approval. And done. Thank you.
Any comments or questions for Jamie on investment performance? Nope. Everybody happy? In which case we will now move to the recommendations as set out on page 119. 3.1, which is to note the information provided in section 6 of the report regarding the fund's investment performance for the quarter ended 31st of March 2025. Item 19 is any items of urgent business. Are there any items of urgent business? As there are none, we will move on to the next item, which is item 20, dates of future meetings. Next meeting is due for 11th September. Item 21 is exclusion of the press and public. Items 22 to 24 are likely to be subject to a motion to exclude the press and public from the meeting as they contain exempt information as defined in Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by Section 12A of the Local Government Act 1985, paragraph 3, namely information